So, hello and welcome to my podcast, Conversations with David. I am your host, David Owasi, and on this podcast, we're talking to professionals and entrepreneurs across the country. We're learning about what keeps them passionate, what keeps them going, and also we're talking about lessons learned along the way. Now, I'm here with someone I have huge respect and admiration for, my good friend Zac Johnson, and I'm very excited about our chats today. Why don't you introduce yourself, Zac?
Yeah, I'm Zac Johnson. I have a history of kind of corporate role in franchising. So spent a lot of years launching 80 plus franchises a year, and scaling them up very quickly. And then for the past number of years, I've kind of changed tactics and learned about digital marketing and run a digital marketing firm. And now I'm kind of blending the two together in an advising role. So helping companies utilize both of those things.
Excellent, Zach. Thanks for the introduction there. And we'll talk about some of those experiences in a little bit. But my first question I wanted to ask you was just your whole entrepreneurship journey and that introduction into entrepreneurship. I know I've heard your story a few times before. You started out as a college pro franchiser way back. Can you just share some more insight on what really interested you in entrepreneurship in the first place?
Sure. I I probably had um, a broken expectation for university. So I wandered into university with the intention of um, doing a psychology major and a philosophy minor, and I still completed those things. But about halfway through, I looked at it and went, I'm I'm struggling with the level of applicable skills that I'm learning here. So my thought was I have to, if there was a way to speed up the degrees so that I could get out into the field faster, that would be good. But also I was looking at my resume with the understanding that there was going to be all of my peers in all of these classes were going to have, similar grades to me and similar resumes. So the only thing I had on my resume prior to that was working on a paving crew. And while that shows a certain level of work ethic, it doesn't show problem solving or working with people in the same way.
Hmm.
So someone came into my class and gave a short little speech before the professor started talking and said, "Hey, you can learn how to run a business." And the rest is kind of history.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought up that point about, looking at your resume and looking at the fact that if you only to finish a university without any other experience, you wouldn't be any different from your colleagues. There are a lot of our listeners who might be in a position where they're thinking, what is the value of a university degree, especially in this age we find ourselves in? How do you balance that approach, having practical experience, but also having some sort of university degree? I know a lot of people would say, university degrees are no longer important. I don't think that's the case, but what are your thoughts on that, balancing having a degree and also having some practical life experience?
That's a good question. I have read quite a bit about kind of the value of a degree in this day and age. And it's not totally obsolete, but it's certainly not as valuable as it was 25 years ago. I think school is going to catch up too. When I say school, I mean I think the university system as it exists currently is going to shift dramatically, especially in the age of COVID, because you've got universities charging full tuition for Zoom classes. And so I think the model is going to necessarily break slightly because you can obviously up the number of students and lower the cost. Your overhead necessarily can be lower, and you can increase the class sizes. But beyond that, I think one of the important things to look at is that, and this kind of occurred to me when I was in school, is that if the majority of individuals your age have a very similar skill set to you, and that includes a university degree, a college degree, a tech degree, you need to be very careful of what else you're adding to differentiate yourself. And so, yeah, that's the big thing that I see. So if you think that you can go get a great degree and that's going to be the be all and end all, I think that you're mistaken. But that was the case 25 years ago. So it's just shifted.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the answers to that question is a business experience. Business almost gives you a bit of a all-round um, uh, all around experiences that you probably won't get in a classroom, from, facing customers, conflict resolution, problem solving, and all of those. I'm very curious, for your first year, what was it like to run a business for the very first year? And the reason why I asked that is some of our listeners are probably thinking, maybe I'm going to try and do this entrepreneurship thing for the very first time. What would you say your first year in business was like?
I think the best thing about learning how to run a business in the beginning is you alluded to it, is that it gets you the opportunity, or gets you to the table that has a multitude of different experiences on it. So there's a book that I like, it's called Algorithms to Live By. And one of the philosophies in the book, and it goes through a multitude of different scenarios, but one of the philosophies is that you should try at least 33% of any given thing before you make a really hard decision on something. So to kind of break this down into a more palatable metaphor, for business, the good thing is when you learn how to run a business, you get to try, you get to test finances, you get to test marketing, you get to test hiring, you get to test leading, you get to test client relations and generating business, and a whole slew of things. And the great thing about that is that after you're done that experience, you can go, man, I don't like financials, or I don't like sales, or I don't like hiring, but I can still run a business and delegate those things if I like the experience in general. If I didn't like the experience in general, I might decide that I really liked hiring and I can go work for a company in that capacity, or leading, or team building. But it gives you a lot of real world experience. And I think that's a really important thing. I realized I didn't want to be a clinical behavior psychologist after I job shadowed in my third year studying psychology. I wish I would have job shadowed in my first year. After I followed a psychologist around for 2 days, I went, I don't want to do this.
Fair enough. Well, that's a very unique insight, and I was reading the Algorithms to Live By. I think that's by Brian Christian and Tom Griffith, and I thought it was a very fascinating idea. And I also loved, your explanation of the fact that you have to explore multiple options to find out what you can't shake off. Can you just walk me through what that process would look like in a practical term? So if you're someone who perhaps you're in your second year of university, or you're just finishing your degree, and you're trying to find things to do in this day and age where everyone is always screaming, go find your passion, go find out one thing that, really keeps you going. How do you balance approaching finding your passion, something you're passionate about, to also exploring a buffet of options to really understand what you can't shake off? How do you manage both?
That's a good question. That's something I've been pondering for a while, because I think there's a lot of pressure, unnecessary pressure, to answer the question when you're 21, 22, 25. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? What's your career? And the question is, I don't know. I don't know, man. Like, stop asking me that question. What's important, especially in I would say your 20s for sure, is to test a few of those things. Go to the buffet and go, what might I like? Don't do it. And this is deliberate testing is important. Okay. It doesn't mean sitting at home playing video games and going, well, I like video games. It means actively going out there and going, okay, I might want to be an engineer. How do I try that out in a small way? Can I call up some engineers and see if they'll let me do a job shadowing for a couple hours? Okay. Can I buy someone who's an engineer coffee and just ask them about their job? Can I read some engineering blogs? But do it deliberately, and look at the number of things that you might want to do. Okay, and do a little bit of testing. Reading an engineering textbook, I'm sorry, is not going to do that for you. I have a good friend who's an engineer, and he's like, I never ever used any of the math that I learned. Okay, I'm not saying it wasn't valuable in some aspect, but it wasn't a good indication of what the job was going to be like on a day-to-day basis.
So you're saying that having some practical experience of whatever field you think you might be interested in is always a good way to understand if you really like that, and if it's something that will be a realistic option for your career. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Because what happens a lot of the time is people think that the school is going to do that. It's going to clarify your passion for you. You're going to come out of school going, man, this is my career for the rest of my life. One, that's problematic, because you're going to have on average 4 or 5 careers over the course of your life. Okay. So take the pressure off of it. But two, it's not a practical taste test of what that might be. So it's a challenging thing because it's a very individualistic thing. You've got to go do that yourself in a deliberate fashion. Again, you can't, if you let yourself kind of get bounced around like a pinball in a pinball machine, and you just hang out with friends and you play video games and you play sports. There's another book that we might touch on today, where So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, and he's got a fascinating little study in there where he talks about 87% of students at a university in Toronto having the same passions, because and there's no way that that big of a cohort can have the same passions and follow up on them, because we can't have 400 professional beer drinkers in a given age group.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you actually brought up that book, So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. I thought it was a very, very interesting analysis in the idea of skills always trumping passion in the quest for work we love. But one of his main concept in that book was the idea that following your passion is a terrible career advice. And this one really got me to take a little bit of a pause, because as a career consultant, I'm always telling people, try to understand your passion, try to understand what you're very, what gets you going in the morning, and trying to find or walk along that line. Why would you agree, or why should we agree with that statement that following your passion is a terrible career advice? Do you agree with that? Is that something you've lived by? Is that something you would recommend other people to live by?
Well, I tried to, I guess, initially. And Cal Newport has another book called How to Be a Straight A student. And it's pretty interesting because he breaks down a lot of the ways that people can build skill sets. But what's important about the kind of the passion myth is that it's a little bit like success. Being successful is a very subjective term, okay? Or even being happy. So when someone says follow your passion, it's hard to define that for yourself. It's hard to sit down and go, what am I passionate about? Because that's such a big, all-encompassing term. It's more important, I think, to look at what am I good at? And what do I enjoy doing? And then where if I spend time, do I get stuck in a flow state? And by that, I mean, where do you lose track of time? Okay, for some people, it's athletics. Some people, it's art. Some people, it's deep conversations with friends. But those three things, if I can look at, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? And then where do I lose track of time? What's my flow state? And then, because there might be a blend of those three things that turns out to be something you really like doing, but you've never heard of. And that's part of the problem by not taking one or two of those things and taking it out to the world and asking people what they think, because you're stuck with a very small number of options that you're supposed to be passionate about.
I really like the idea of flow state that you brought up. It's something that also has been on my radar in the last couple of years. Things that you feel you get lost in and you lose track of time. I guess in today's age, where you have to pay the bills, you have all these practical obligations that you're tied to, and how do you balance? Again, I'm guessing I like using that word balancing, but how do you balance being practical, which is finding jobs that you can help pay your bills and live life, and also how do you balance that with finding something where you can feel lost in? I guess, in my opinion, if I look at that from that perspective, I'm always thinking about something like a hobby. So a hobby usually is a good place to start out with, something you don't actually mind spending time doing, and then perhaps you can maybe turn your hobby into something that you get paid doing. Would that be a practical way to approach finding that balance using a hobby perspective, or would that be other recommendations from you?
I would say that's one aspect of the triangle, right? What you enjoy doing is often a hobby for a lot of people, okay? But don't forget what you're good at, because you might be really good at, let's say, just working with people, but you don't do it as a hobby. Okay, you might be the person that organizes events for all your friends all of the time, but you may not put that in the hobby category. Okay, and flow state might be when you're sketching, or let's say downhill skiing, where you're getting lost in something, but you might look at that and go, well, that's a pastime, or that's a sport that I do. Okay, so I think that kind of in the middle of that triangle, or where those things intersect or blend together, is where you can start to come up with some things. I think where most people run into problems again, though, is they don't know what they don't know. Like, I I never once considered, initially, uh, moving up in the corporate world of a franchise company. That wasn't ever on my list as a 25-year-old, a 21-year-old, any ever. I didn't know about it. I didn't even understand it. So, but it was along that line of questioning. It was a number of connections down the road.
Mm. Well, I know one of College Pro, one of the main themes was being open to new ideas. And I think that was one of the big themes of the College Pro franchise at the time. But I wanted to move on to on that point here, again, from that book by Cal Newport, So Good They Can't Ignore You. He also made a big point about having a craftsman mindset, which is, focusing on rare and valuable skills. What would you say is one way to find those types of skills? Like, what would you consider rare and valuable, and how do you find those skills for yourself?
Well, there's rare and valuable, and I think those are particularly important in a pool where there's a lot of people. Okay, so if you're in the pool that you know once business is one, right? So if you're taking a business degree, that's a very general degree most of the time. So you may really want to think about what skill set am I getting, and it's not just a specialization in finances or marketing, but what skill set am I getting there that's very very niche. So maybe I learn enough about tech companies that are international, or I am very specific about recruiting millennials, and I really gain a skill set. I think that's hard to do in a university setting a lot of the time. Okay, I think it's easier to do in the real world with a special, like working with a company that does that, because that's something that's applicable on a resume. Um, However, I think that it's also important to recognize that, and this is his craftsman mentality, that you're going to pick something, and there's a trick. You have to stick with it long enough to get competent with it, but there's a point to which it's going to stop being enjoyable or fun, okay, or a flow state all of the time. Tim Ferriss, in a podcast recently, he kind of dismantled the quote. I think it's it might be a Bernard Shaw quote, but he talks about the fact that if you find a job you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. I'm not sure who said that, but he says, I have a job that I love. And he's like, it's crap, because there are days I hate this job. He has a job that he has total control over, makes a lot of money at, is very interesting, very niche, very specialized, very rare. Uh, and there's still days he doesn't like it. So even within the understanding that it might be something you enjoy, if you decide you're going to pursue it, at least even for a trial period in the real world, understand that there are going to be days you don't like it. So if you like painting as a hobby and you do it for 3 hours a week right now, and you decide you're going to try it as a career and you attempt it for 60 hours a week, you're going to hate some of it. And that's the craftsman mindset, where you have to get good at just saying, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to be more competent at it. And I'm not going to think that I'm just going to love it every minute of every day.
Hmm. I guess it's really just coming to that realization and understanding that sometimes you wouldn't necessarily love it every minute, but of course the idea is to love it most of the time. Now, in my reading, Zach, one of the themes I've repeatedly seen across the board is the idea of content creation being a job of the future. And the idea is that, in the future, practical jobs like how we know it wouldn't be the big jobs available in the future. It would be creating content, whether that's, on LinkedIn, TikTok, wherever it is, the platform. And that will be sort of the new currency of the future. Have you put any thought into the idea of content creation and where you see that going in the future? Is that something that has come on your radar at all?
And we're talking about Cal Newport a lot here. There's another book called Digital Minimalism, but where he gets into that a little bit. I think, and this is my opinion, but that we're sort of past the age of information. Information we have raining down on our heads. I think we're going to move into the age of instruction a bit more, where we take this information and we transmute it into applicable steps for other people. So I think you got to be careful of content creation as a whole. That doesn't mean you should start a blog and just get blogging right away, or start a TikTok account or Instagram account, because a lot of those are really red oceans too. So I think you should, if you're going to do that or think about it, you should come at it from the perspective of, what is someone taking away as a skill set from what I'm doing? And that's one way of looking at it. It's my opinion around it. But I don't think you're wrong in the sense that we're going to move towards content creation, but understand that that's going to be an increasingly red ocean. So if there's not a level of instruction to it, you should consider it probably to be more of a hobby and less of a career.
Right. So basically what I'm hearing from you is content creation will need to have some context around it. It's not just creating content, but it's also having some sort of value where your content is giving more in value than the payment, which is the attention you're requiring from the audience. Is that correct?
Right. Because there
Right.
are the 1% of people who just like churn out content for the sake of content. Like, was it Charlie D'Amelio on TikTok? Right? It's not, maybe there's some instructional value there in the way that she's teaching how to dance, but most of it is just entertainment. But it's important not to utilize those 1% as a template for you.
Fair enough. It's very hard to replicate, I would say. It's more the anomaly than the norm. And while we are still on the notion of Cal Newport, it's a fascinating writer. Another idea from his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, is the idea of autonomy. I think that's how you pronounce it. Autonomy being more important for job satisfaction. Now, I know that I've always thought of autonomy as something that is very important to me, but would you agree with his idea that autonomy is probably the most important recipe to be happy in a job? Some people like, to have direction and to have some sort of person supervising them, whether it's to kind of give them that boost of motivation they need, or whether it's whatever reason it is. Some people feel like having autonomy might not necessarily be a good thing. In your opinion, what are your thoughts on autonomy and job satisfaction and success?
I think he gets into it, one step further, and he says impact, creativity, and control, right, are attached to what people really need. They need in some degree, or in a job, to be totally happy. And by that, he means that I think that if you know that you have some impact in your day-to-day life, and if you happen to die tomorrow, knock on wood, that someone couldn't replace you entirely, and you wouldn't be missed. And some level of creativity, can you change a few things in your workplace, and then some level of control. So I think autonomy is maybe an overview of those things, or one step up on a top-down view. The understanding, though, is that I think if you're somebody that likes a bit more, doesn't want to be in a leadership role, right, you might want maybe a little less impact, a little less creativity, but still some control over what you're doing. And if you're in a leadership role, you might want a lot more creativity and a lot more impact. But people who have none of those things really struggle with job satisfaction. There's another guy, his name is Johan Hari. He writes a book called Lost Connections, and he talks about a tax auditor, and they have very low job satisfaction because they have an infinite number of work. They can work really hard, or they can not work very hard, and nothing changes. And they're always dealing with people who hate them. And there's no way of measuring if you're doing a really good job or a really bad job.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be a tax auditor. Yeah, thanks for your response to that. I want to sort of bring the conversation back to you a little bit on your story. So I know you currently work as a business coach with Cultivate, and of course you've had multiple sort of experiences from a franchise owner perspective, from a business owner perspective, and also from a psychological perspective. How do you approach business coaching, and what would you say is the biggest thing you typically will tell your clients from a business development perspective?
Well, I probably have a slightly different perspective on it, because I like working with people, and I've worked with people for years. And so I went and got a master's in executive coaching. Um, and I would say that I think that coaching from a pure perspective implies that you ask people questions that they know the answer to themselves. They just have difficulty seeing in the moment. Consulting is telling somebody the answer, and advising is probably a blend somewhere in the middle, saying, "Hey, I've tried this. You want to consider that, but I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions for you to consider it relatively objectively as well, without my input." So I don't know if that adds more clarity or makes the water more muddy, but um, I think that what I tell people is very dependent on where they are and where they want to go.
Hmm. A lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs in some version, whether they're in their first, second, third year of business, or perhaps they are very experienced. What would you say, considering the age we find ourselves in, we're in a pandemic, and that brings, any number of challenges to all types of business. What are the biggest problems you've been seeing with the businesses you've been coaching as a result of this pandemic? And what are perhaps some of the unique solutions or the approaches or perhaps maybe the mindset you've been recommending or advising business owners as they try to navigate this very challenging time?
Well, there are some businesses that are just going to struggle, like travel businesses, and that sucks. But for uh, a multitude of other businesses, they're either stuck in one of two scenarios. They're in a scenario where they're they're looking at how to adapt, and they're solving that problem, or they've adapted and they're actually gathering some of the market share from some of the people who didn't adapt. So if you're one of those businesses that has, maybe dipped a little bit, but you've largely kept revenues the same, you're probably in a scenario where you're going, okay, actually now there are opportunities to actually move forward. And it's sort of strange. It would seem counterintuitive in a pandemic. Um, Now, again, there are businesses like, the gyms and the travel agencies of the world that are limited currently. But a lot of trades businesses are booming because people are sitting at home going, I really don't like my kitchen wallpaper. I need to remodel this or change it up. And a lot of those businesses aren't limited by being in people's faces immediately all of the time. So renovations and the trades are booming currently. And there's an understanding though that in almost every niche there are the people who have figured it out and are moving forward, are the ones that are struggling. So in Warren Buffett would say, never waste a good crisis. But it's more about looking at, okay, what can we do? And then how do we adapt? So I had a yoga studio the other day ask me, should we, we're doing really good online. Should we move back to opening in the studio? And my recommendation was, well, do you need to? Like, what do you think? And they looked at it and went, we're very profitable online. We're holding all these big online classes. Um, we're handling more students than we ever did at lower price points. But considering the fact that we may close down again, they're going to hold off on opening in the studio for the time being.
Absolutely. Thanks for
So
that. Sir, go ahead.
yeah, no, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. It gives me a lot of perspective on how to handle that. However, on the flip side, for someone who is actually thinking about perhaps starting their first business, and I've spoken to a lot of people who are maybe this is not the best time to start a business. I mean, this is like the worst time in the world with all the shutdowns and all of the the economic hardship right now. Would you say that this might actually be a very, very good time to start a business, or would that be a bad advice to someone who's thinking of starting?
I really think it depends on the business. So if you're going to start a tech business that's going to help people adapt to online, this is the best time. If you want to start a gym and have in-person classes, maybe not so good. Um, but it really depends on, yeah, what the service or product is that you're offering, and how you plan to go about it. Because more than ever, so some of the pluses, more than ever, people are sitting at home looking at YouTube. So if you're planning on marketing to Google, Facebook, YouTube, you've got a captive audience, so to speak. But the challenge is that if it's more of a brick and mortar type store, you're going to have a harder time drawing people towards it.
Enough.
So
Yeah. So yeah, those are very, very fantastic answers. Thanks, Zach. Now, one of the things, and when we were preparing for this conversation, we briefly talked about emotional intelligence slash soft skills, and of course, we referenced the work of Daniel Goleman, renowned psychologist. Now, I know you're very well read on this issue. What would you say is the place of emotional intelligence and soft skills in successful, entrepreneurship or professional career? And personally, for myself, I think it's been hugely important in my success. But for our listeners, what would you say is the role of EQ and soft skills in success generally?
well, I think in Focus, Goleman talks about the fact that it's the best predictor of earnings, emotional intelligence,
Mm.
and he talks about the fact that people can almost be put on a scale. But I think that it's important because one, you're not going to have one career for the most part. The average person has 5 careers over a lifetime. This isn't jobs. This is from going to a fireman to a school teacher, like total shifts, which is hard to kind of wrap your head around if you're 20 to 30, because you're going to be working until you're 70. But the other side of it is that it's important in the capacity to be able to move up in anything. So this means even if you're an entrepreneur, to scale your business, you got to be able to work with people, hire smart people, and build a team. If you work in the corporate world, you've got to be able to work with people, and other people need to be able to see that you can work with people to move up. So I think more than anything, emotional intelligence is the prerequisite for the capacity to move in almost any pattern throughout life, because you're going to have to work with people in some capacity. If you want to be just a lone wolf, you don't got to worry about it too much.
Yeah, I
But
definitely.
we're tribal.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think I like the way you really put it, is if you want to scale in any way, whether it's promotion or whether it's increasing your business revenue size or your team, of course you have to work with people, and emotional intelligence is really a huge part of that equation. Now, from Goleman's work, I think he really breaks down emotional intelligence into four categories. I think he talked about awareness. He talked about regulation, which is being able to regulate your emotion. He also talked about empathy, putting yourself in other people's shoes, and then he talked about skilled relationships, which is basically combining all of those three areas. Now, for someone who is thinking, the whole idea of emotional intelligence is just this complicated, abstract thing. How do you actually go about really improving your skills in emotional intelligence? Like, what are practical steps you would say has helped you in your own personal growth journey from an entrepreneur to a business coach to who you are right now? What would be steps you would recommend for someone who's trying to grow these skills?
well, I was very lucky because I had the sort of the school of hard knocks and a good teacher, in the sense that I, at a pretty young age, got to hire a lot of people and sort of try them out, and if they didn't work, fire them. And that doesn't sound all that maybe politically correct. You shouldn't necessarily start a business for the sake of learning how to become better with people, but I do think that it's about jumping into a challenge that scares you just a little bit, and make sure that you've got someone that can give you some feedback, and you you know you don't take it personally. So if you are truly dedicated to getting better in a emotional intelligent realm, it can be in a wide degree of businesses and social environments. One of the easiest ways to do it is actually just Toastmasters. And I'm sure there's a local Toastmasters near you, because you get to go up, speak to a group of people, and get some feedback on it. And that's one of the simplest ways to start that process, because you get used to someone telling you that was crappy, and you don't go home and cry about it. You write it down and you change it, and then you try it again. So that process of kind of rinse and repeat and getting some feedback is how you do it, because it can't be a solo endeavor.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with you. And when I think about my own experience, thinking of my soft skills in my first year of business, I was abysmal. All of my employees quit on my first day on the job because I was being such a bad boss. And I think it was then that I just remembered understanding that this is not sustainable. If I wanted to grow my business, if I wanted to be successful by any version, I had to improve my soft skills. And I think one of the things for myself that has really been a huge difference for me growing the skill was journaling. And I thought, I typically had problems with my awareness. I was not aware of myself when I was doing certain things. And only when I had blown up or I'd, whatever, lost my cool, it was then I realized, oh, shoot, that was really bad. And I found that, journaling and writing all of my experiences as I felt them, almost conversing with myself was really key in being able to stay and be aware of myself regardless of what's happening around me. In your opinion, Zach, what would you think is a place of awareness in really being able to be emotional intelligence? Because I feel like awareness is such, it's almost like the beginning point, because if you're not aware of where you are, it's hard for you to even go ask for feedback. It's hard for you to take any feedback and look at it objectively.
Sure, the Dunning-Kruger effect takes place, right? You're sort of not aware enough to be aware of how unaware you are. um, so I think that journaling is great, but if you don't see any movement in a very short amount of time, you got to get someone else in there giving you some feedback. So journaling, I think, is a great supplement, and can be a good place to start. But be careful about journaling just on its own, because that implies that you can give yourself all the feedback that you need.
That's a vital perspective. I've actually never thought of that. And considering now that you've made a point that, having some sort of external, almost mirror to be able to reflect and see yourself for who you really are is very important. How do you go about finding people who will give you such important feedback? And how do you decipher feedback that is useful and constructive and feedback that is perhaps, rooted in from the wrong motivation? How do you take feedback and use it properly in a way that benefits you?
Actually, Tim Ferriss has a great podcast on this, like how to find a mentor. I think that's what it's called. But he talks about how to go up to somebody who is clearly in a place you want to be and approach them without smothering them. So meeting them for coffee once or twice a year and asking them some questions. Um, uh, it's important to come at it, I think, from that perspective, because a lot of the time, somebody who's moving and shaking, their time is valuable, and it's important to make sure that you're approaching it delicately. The other aspect that I would encourage people to consider is actually Brené Brown talks about it, and you should check out her TED Talks if you haven't already. But she's amazing in the sense that she looks at it and goes, okay, I'm going to get a lot of feedback from people as I move through life. I have to make sure that if I decide to take it seriously, are they somebody who's been where I've been? Are they in the arena? And are they moving towards the same goal? Because you're going to get, even feedback from your mom. And she's like, you should not do that. And you have to look at it objectively and go, Mom, like, I don't think that you are where I want to be. And that's maybe a horrible way of looking at it, but also you're not giving me advice from where I want to go. I don't think you understand that aspect of things. So, some of your mother's advice might be great around family and, maybe if she had a great career and you've got some advice around that. But if your career is very different than hers, be careful to take that advice too seriously. So that being said, I would go to Tim Ferriss if you want to find a mentor. But if you want to learn how to screen all the advice coming in to you in your life, just on a day-to-day basis, whether it be digital and or in person, Brené Brown's got some great stuff on that. Rising Strong is where she starts to really kind of break down how to take the feedback that you've got coming at you and put it in a discard pile or put it in a keep pile.
Absolutely. I think I like what you referenced there, which is, someone who is in the arena, someone who is where you are right now, or at least they've been there before. I think those are the types of people who can provide some more objective advice, not just words, because they've been there, they understand what you're feeling, and they know how to move on from there. So that's very, very nice advice there. Thanks, Zach. So the last piece of questions I'm very curious is I've been very curious to see how high performers like yourself, how the pandemic has affected them one way or the other, whether it's in your personal life or professionally. How would you say, number one, how would you say the pandemic has affected the way you typically would live your life from a professional and personal perspective?
That's a big question. Um, I think that I think there's a funny aspect of things that start to happen when you've got a lot of time. So we always think, oh, and when I have time, I write a book, or when I have time, I make an album or paint that picture. And I've learned that that's not the case. I've learned that when given a great deal of time, I don't jump in and pursue the things that I've, wanted to do or had on that list and use the excuse of time for. So that's one thing that I'm still contemplating. I'm still just bumping it around in my head and trying to come to more terms with it. But I think the thought that I've landed on currently is that, you want something done, give it to a busy person. So I've actually I've done more when I've done more, and that's not going to go away. So restructuring my life to be uh, sort of capable of handling as much as I would have when I was out in the world, and not as interconnected with people, is important, for one, because I've just gotten more of the things that I've had on the bucket list done when I've been busier, and am busier now again. Um, and two, from a relationship perspective, I think what's important as well is to recognize that if you're somebody who maybe saw your significant other or your friends on a semi-regular basis, you see them for a couple hours in the evening every day, it's very different than hanging around people a lot. So significant others, you probably hang around a lot more, right? You see them, for many more hours a day. And then some friends you see less. So there's a reevaluation of things. I'm not saying leaving your partner and getting more friends or vice versa. I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah, for me, my relationship has changed with my partner. There's a different type of depth there, and also a different expectation that it doesn't need to be just a wild roller coaster ride of fun every time we hang out. There's a lot of just mundane times, and that's okay. And then from a friend perspective, there's some friends that I'm like, I don't know if we line up as much, because what we used to do is just drink beer and play pool, and we can't do that. So I'm struggling sometimes to find what we have in common. So, and that's okay too. I'm realizing all of that is okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well, especially considering I'm a new dad. It's been very interesting having all of that time to spend with my family, because I do appreciate, all of that time, considering that, I have a son now, and spending time with my son is such valuable thing. It's pretty neat. I'm also curious for yourself here. I'm curious about predictions. You're someone whose thought process I have huge respect and curiosity about. What do you think moving forward will change? Just predictions, and I guess there's no right or wrong answers for this. But what would you think will change as a result of this pandemic, considering everyone has been affected, both from a personal and professional perspective, moving forward?
Well, the thing that I've been reading about and also thinking about a lot is education. And so I think that, we touched on it a little bit in the beginning, where school is, in my opinion, going to have to change drastically the model of what we see school to be. Um, and I think that you're going to see it change drastically, just for something that you can purchase, and just how we go about gathering skill sets is going to be different. You're going to see less people go to a traditional school, And I think that you're going to see more people gather valuable skill sets on their own for less time, or less money and less time, truthfully. And I think there's opportunity there. There's opportunity for investments. There's opportunity for jobs. There's opportunity for just self-discovery. So you've got big companies like Mind Valley, Masterclass, that are doing really well because they offer, for a fraction of the price, an expert that allows you the same experience that you would now have at a university over Zoom, with someone who has lived it, done it, been there, is in the arena. So my prediction currently is that if you have a skill set that you think is marketable and valuable, now is a really good time to try it out in a even a small way. You can moonlight and try it out in the evenings online. It can be as simple as hopping onto Airbnb and teaching a class. Airbnb has pivoted massively, right? And they have a lot of classes, opportunities, and tours they're offering virtually. So there's somebody who is, that's their adaptation process.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize that. That's pretty cool. And on your point with Masterclass, you're correct. I actually got a Masterclass subscription this pandemic because I was very curious about learning new things. And I've learned everything from space and rockets and ships to, gardening. And it's just been a very interesting experience so far. So before I let you go here, Zac, I mean, it's been a wonderful conversation, very insightful conversation, which is pretty much what I expected talking to you. Any last words of advice? And just to give you a perspective here, our audience, a combination of, young people who are sort of in their early university years to people who are business owners and establishing their careers. Any advice you would like to leave before we let you go here?
Yeah, if you're young, and I would say if you're 20 to 30 and you still have no idea what you want to do, even if you're 40 to 60 and you have no idea, do some deliberate testing. Reach out to somebody who's doing what you're doing, and even if you hop on the phone with them for 5 minutes and ask them about what they do, that deliberate testing is really important because it gives you concrete feedback on what you might think you want to do. Okay, and it could be as you might look and go, oh, I really want to be a professional TikToker. Well, message a few people and get their opinion on it. Okay, and it's easy to do in a digital world. That's number one. Number two, don't be too quick to think you have to choose something. If you haven't tried, if you haven't deliberately tested at least a handful of things, I would say you don't have enough information to do that, right? There are very, very, very few people who know they want to be a fireman at age 5 and end up being a fireman for 60 years. Okay, like less than 0.01%. It's super rare. And even those firemen would move up through the ranks to become fire chief. So take some of the pressure off. Okay, try a few more things deliberately, and you'll start to realize there's more options than you saw.
So basically, you don't know what you don't know until you try all the options before you really understand what you know. Oh,
right.
Really understand. Yeah. It's a bit of a mind twister, that one. Thank you, Zac. It's been such a huge pleasure having this conversation with you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
No problem, David.